Hey guys, welcome back to my painting channel. Today I'm going to show you a time lapse to create this painting right here. This is the sunset over Maui in Hawaii, and the time lapse is coming up next, so enjoy. Hey YouTube friends, thanks for joining me today. I am working on a landscape painting of the sunset on the island of Maui in Hawaii. So to get started with this painting, I am using thinned down oil paint to sketch out the concept, and then once I sketched out roughly where my ocean meets my sky and my little tree line there, I started to fill in a base color for the sky. I started out with using phthalo blue with white and some phthalo green in the upper left, and then transitioned that into my warmer orange and yellow and purple tones in the bottom right where we have the sun setting. I'm just using a brush with back and forth motions to make a smooth transition from that warm sunset color into my blue. And then once I got that base color down for the sky, I let that sit and dry, and I worked on other parts of the painting just to get a base color down, like the ocean, those trees, and then the little palm tree line in the background, and the vegetation in the foreground. Once I finished getting this full base color of paint, I let the painting sit for a couple days, and I let all of that paint fully dry, and then I went back and began to add details to the sky. For detailing the sky, I started by just kind of throwing in some shapes for my clouds with a neutral purple, cool to warm. It's getting warmer as we're getting closer to where the sun's setting. And then we have some more orange and cool reds above the area right where the sun is going to be setting. Just sprinkling some clouds in here and making them nice and puffy and not too thick, not too saturated yet, because I'm going to be building up more texture and color soon. Here I'm working on adding shadows to my clouds first. After I add some shadows, then I'll start to build with some highlights on top of those shadows. And you can see the clouds just starting to pop out and look a little bit three-dimensional. Now the clouds that are high up in the sky are closer to us, and the clouds that are closer to the horizon are actually much farther away. So that cloud that's in the upper right is much larger, and it's going to have a little more detail than the clouds farther back. Even though this cloud is not super thick, you can see a bit of the atmosphere behind the cloud, but we still have a little more going on in that cloud right above all the other clouds. So I'm taking a break on the sky for now. I go back later and add additional details, but that's a good place for me to stop at the moment. Next, I started working on the tree line that we can see along the coast and running off onto the left side of our canvas. I'm also working on defining the edges of the ocean where that horizon line meets the sky, and starting to add some white where our ocean is breaking waves near the shore. Now the ocean looks nice blue, but it's not true to what we would see in nature at this point, because the water is just a reflection of what we have in the sky. So we are going to have more warm colors in the ocean because our sky directly above it has that sun setting right there. So I'm adding some warmer colors that we have already in the sky into the ocean, just to make that ocean look a little bit more readable for this time of day. And again, I do go back and continue to add more colors to the ocean, but for now I'm just leaving it and starting to add some details to the palm trees, moving closer to the viewer. So as the palm trees are moving closer to the viewer, they're getting larger and larger. This palm tree right here is so tall that the top of it doesn't even make it into the frame. But this helps to give us a good sense of depth, because we can tell that this palm tree in the foreground and that palm tree behind it are probably about the same size, but we can tell that this one in the foreground is much closer to us just because of its size compared to that one behind it. To get these palm trees started, I just added a base color, more of like a silhouette for now, and then I'll start to add more color and detail to these palm trees and the palm branches later on. But for now, I just wanted to kind of get some branches in there using my liner brush and just a base color, and then go back later. I have my brush thinned down with paint thinner to give me a nice workable brush stroke. That's, you know, the paint's thinned down so I can just carry my brush across the canvas without it getting textured and leaving bumps. Here I'm starting to add some more detail and just figure out my colors for the vegetation in the foreground. Even though in my reference photograph these plants in the foreground are all the same shade of green, that photo was taken probably with an iPhone, and it just made all of those greens that same color because the sun was setting. We can't really distinguish each piece of vegetation from another piece. However, in the painting I wanted us to be able to tell different species of plants from each other, so I added some variation in my greens to this vegetation in the foreground. As we move back, we have less contrast and less detail because we can't see quite as far. So I'm using a small brush and still adding my highlights and shadows, but not going too crazy with the detail in the plants and the ocean in the far background. Now I'm adding more highlights and shadows to the vegetation in the foreground, and that's what really makes that vegetation stand out and draw us into the painting, is that contrast between where that sun is still hitting the vegetation and the dark shadows created on the other side of the plant. Now I'm beginning to add some detail to the palm tree just to make it stand out a little bit more than it would as a silhouette. So I'm adding some highlights to the blades on the branches, and that highlight is a shade of sap green, burnt umber, and cadmium yellow light. Just gives me a little bit more definition and a three-dimensional appearance in those branches there. And I'm continuing to work on the various types of vegetation in the foreground, adding shadows and highlights. For the highlights, I'm just using that fine round-tipped brush and letting the brush just kind of dance and dabble little highlight sections of leaves on the vegetation. Now for the trunks on the palm trees closer to us in the foreground, we have a shadow that's more of a purple brown, and then we have a highlight that's more like a warm orange. So I'm just making the shadow on the left, the highlight on the right, and letting them blend in together. Then where we have the pieces of growth, those rings around the palm tree stump, we have like a darker brown there, so I was just making little lines go across. And then our viewpoint for the angle of those rings is different. So when we're looking at the rings closer to the bottom, they're more like a flat line. And then looking up towards the top of the palm tree, they become more of an arch. And I had a final few finishing touches for this piece, including boosting that contrast between highlight and shadow on the blades of grass in the foreground, and then touching up a few of the trees in the background. And then once I completed that, I called this a completed painting.